Good evening, fam. Here we are again in the Martin household. What's going on? And we are back. So again, we are going into a warning, chapter 1. Yesterday we did the intro. Woo! So anyway, I hope y'all grab your beverage, whatever works for you. Grab your beverage, y'all, because we're about to read, okay? This chapter 1, and let me make sure everybody can hear me. Hopefully y'all can hear me okay. Okay, so chapter 1, collapse of the steady state. We're gonna need some of this. Okay, so it opens with a quote. No government, any more than an individual, will long be respected without being truly respectable, nor be truly respectable without possessing a certain portion of order and stability. James Madison. The day began like any other in the Trump administration with a self-inflicted crisis. It was Wednesday, December 19th, 2018, and the White House was dealing with a communications problem. Like, what day aren't they dealing with a communications problem? The State Department had decided to unveil an economic development program in Latin America the day before, which experts believed would reduce violence and instability in the region. There was one catch. The president was on the brink of scrapping it, I should say. He reportedly thought it was too expensive and threatened to kill the deal by tweet. Its architects panicked about whether the president was going to create a diplomatic row. As it often does, the main show turned out to be a sideshow. Now, this is from a person in the White House saying the main show turned out to be a sideshow. That's how you know it's like deflect, deflect, deflect. The president hadn't yet come down from the residence to the Oval Office. We all knew why. It was prime tweeting hour, and it's 9:29 a.m. He fired off a missive from the executive mansion. Quote, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria, my only reason for being there during the Trump presidency," unquote. Within minutes, news broke that the president had decided to withdraw. He later tweeted, quote, "After historic victories against ISIS, it's time to bring our great young people home," end quote. The announcement reverberated across Washington. It was contrary to what had been recommended to him. From the top Pentagon officials to leaders of the intelligence community, most of the president's top advisors cautioned against arbitrarily pulling the roughly 2,000 U.S. troops out of Syria. Now, you all remember, we just went through this. So this is back in December. He's giving you the tea from inside, and we just went through where we pulled out. And what they said would happen, did happen. ISIS was still a potent threat. He was told, and America's exit would allow the group to reconstitute and plot more deadly attacks. And what's in the news now? Exactly that. An early pullout would also cede the area to a dictator who used chemical weapons on his own people, to the anti-American Iranian regime that was expanding its reach in the region, and to Russia. What's more, it would probably result in the slaughter of Kurdish forces who had helped us go after terrorists. In every way, withdrawal would damage U.S. security interests. So we know that now. He knew that then. Everybody was telling him that. The president was unmoved. Rather than convene his national security team to discuss options, he bucked them with a tweet. Quote, "People are going to effing die because of this," unquote, a top aide angrily remarks. So one of his own people tells him people are going to effing die because of this. One of his own people. We all scrambled to figure out what had happened and what Trump's plans were. U.S. allies were baffled and alarmed. The DOD was in the dark. Officials couldn't even figure out how to respond to press inquiries since it was a decision in which they had played virtually no role. The nation's top military brass were infuriated at the lack of pre-planning, as the sudden announcement meant soldiers on the ground could immediately become sitting ducks, potentially vulnerable to attack from opportunistic adversaries who saw them as being in retreat. The military hastily began contingency planning to ensure U.S. forces were not put in harm's way. We'd all seen presidents make poor decisions when it came to America's defense. This was different. None of us could recall it being done so casually. In a normal White House, decisions of this magnitude receive sober deliberation. They are the subject of sensitive meetings, sometimes too many meetings, just to make sure the details are right. All the bases get covered and every question gets answered. How will our enemies interpret this? What can we do to affect their thinking? How will our partners react? And most importantly, how will we best protect the American people, including our men and women in uniform? None of these questions were answered beforehand. Oh, it's time for a drink. Oh my gosh. What's up, y'all? We're getting into this chapter 1. I can't even do it. Not only was the decision reckless, but administration officials have been testifying under oath that ISIS was not yet eliminated. Hey, Joan girl. They publicly vowed that the United States would not abandon the fight in Syria. Now the president was falsely declaring ISIS to be finished because he just decided it was true one day. Now, we all know that when we see his tweets, we always think that his own boys, his squad are like, he just decided that, tweeted it, and then think that makes it fact. Oh my gosh. He was broadcasting to the enemy that America was headed for the exit. We're going to get hauled up to the hill and crucified for this, a senior cabinet member lamented. So basically, in the military strategy, you don't let people know what you're about to do, especially before you do it, unless it's a strategic move and you want to pre-warn them. Homie is sending out all the business without any sort of calculation, strategy, planning. Just he woke up and decided it was a good idea. Oh, bless it. In Congress, reaction came swiftly, including from Trump's own party. I'd never seen a decision like this since I've been here in 12 years. A baffled Senator, Bob Corker, then chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, told reporters, "It is hard to imagine that any president would wake up and make this kind of decision with little communication, with this little preparation." Even Senator Lindsey Graham, his homeboy, who'd been trying to curry Trump's favor, blasted the decision. Lindsey told reporters the announcement had rattled the world. He knew this brother was crazy. It was a watershed moment for another reason too. It signaled the downfall of key officials who thought they could bring order to the administration's chaos. One in particular decided enough was enough. The day after the Syria tweets, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis announced his resignation. Yeah, he was bouncing. He realized, I thought I could save the ship, and the ship was sinking. So Mattis was like, deuces. So in a letter to the president, he wrote, quote, "My views on treating allies with respect and always being clear-eyed about both malign actors and strategic competitors are strongly held and informed by my over 4 decades of immersion in these issues. Because you have a right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours on these and other subjects, I believe it is right for me to step down from my position." Now, let me stop right here. This is a man who decided, I'm going to stay on. I'm going to try to do my job. I'm going to serve the Constitution and the American people. And he thought he could make a difference. And when he realized this ain't happening, okay, it's time to go. So Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis was like, sorry, you need somebody that thinks like you think and that tweets 75,000 times a day. And it wasn't him. So he wasn't having it. So you got to give courage and give props to people who step out, even when they thought they could stay in or thought they could support. And they're like, not today, player. So he left. So he set a departure date for February 28th. Jim Mathis is a patriot and a warfighter who had earned bipartisan support when he was nominated for Secretary of Defense. Perpetually stoic, he told senators concerned about Trump that he wouldn't for a moment sit idle if he felt the president was asking him to do things that ran contrary to his conscience or that would needlessly put lives in danger. Jim was, as ever, true to his word. The resignation shook the White House all the way to the Oval Office. Now, this again, his boy, and he's leaving. The press called it a protest resignation. President Trump was incensed. In classic fashion, one bad decision led to another, and within days, the president decided in a temper tantrum to move Secretary Mattis's departure date forward. He wanted Jim out as soon as possible, because, you know, he can't stand nobody to talk against him. This once again drew the DOD into unnecessary turmoil as aides scrambled to figure out the succession plan. Leadership changes atop the world's mightiest military usually take several months at least to game out to ensure stability. Let me tell you something. Stability? Are we thinking he understands stability? No. Trump chopped it down to a few days. He thinks this is like The Apprentice, where you could just get rid of people and bring people in and do whatever you want to do. He tweeted about the Pentagon's number two. He tweeted that the Pentagon's number two would assume the duties of the top job on January 1st, 2 months sooner than planned. The next week, in the Orwellian up is down culture that we'd all grown accustomed to, the president bragged that he essentially fired the decorated Marine general. The loss was felt throughout the administration and the world. One of the few reasonable hands on board the ship of state was headed overboard. He was out. From the very start, like-minded appointees observed the president's erratic management style with concern. We made a concerted effort to replace the tumultuous environment with a disciplined policy process. In other words, a system for making sure presidential decisions were considered thoughtfully, procedures were followed, all sides of a debate were considered, and ultimately that the president was set up for success, including with advisors willing to speak up when the president was headed in the wrong direction. So break this down. They think that they've set up enough of a, what do you put kids in? The pack and plays. They thought they had set up a big enough pack and play around him to protect America from him. So they figure we set up enough procedures and policies and people so that he can't really do enough damage. But they forgot to take the toy out of his hands. And ultimately now, here we go. This is what's going on. So he's like, we thought the situation was manageable. We were dead wrong. If 2017 marked the rise of a loose cabal of pragmatists in the Trump administration, a steady state, 2018 marked the start of its demise. The next part is called the state of chaos. The early days of any presidential administration are tough. You can't hand over the reins of a $4 trillion a year organization without millions of employees and expect a seamless transition. The outgoing White House typically directs agencies to help prepare their replacements to take over. Leading up to the inauguration, a flurry of briefings are held. New employees are informed about sensitive programs. Memos are prepared to bring in the incoming team up to speed. Sometimes an outgoing administration will offer to leave some of their own officials in place for a few weeks or months into the new president's term in order to make the handoff easier, right? So, you know, they have the little meet and greet at the White House. It's like, bless you, good luck, good luck. And usually they'll leave some people there just out of respect and courtesy. I don't know how many people stayed for this one. Even then, it's still never enough to prepare any group of people for the extraordinary challenge of running the U.S. government. Because this is already, right, like top tier, hardest job ever, most important job ever. And now you're not going to have no turnover. For the incoming Trump administration, the situation was much harder. It had all been spun differently now, but few people on the Trump campaign, up to and including the candidate himself, truly expected to win, and it showed. I knew that going in. I said that the whole time. He thinks this is a TV show, and he didn't realize it's actually a job you have to wake up and do every day. And I'm right. Every time I turn around, somebody from inside is saying he didn't think he was going to win. The mood was bleak for employees of his transition team. The group of aides responsible for mapping out an administration in waiting in the event that Trump won, some were sending out resumes to find work before the voters of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin cast historic ballots on November 8th. The election result left the transition team rattled. Now they were actually going to be in charge of a presidential transition. Inexperienced operatives admitted that they were not ready. Most had never led a government changeover, and they were left without the guidance of seasoned veterans from previous Republican transitions, many of whom had decided to sit the race out, certain there would be no Trump presidency. What remained were a bench of B-listers. Nonetheless, the head of the Trump transition team, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, now we all remember Chris, oh, wasn't he fun, believed he had a plan, albeit with a staff lagging behind in preparations when compared to its predecessors. Those designed ended up on the ash heap of history, as did their designer. Fresh off his election victory, President-elect Trump suddenly decided to sack Christie as the transition chief and make Vice President-elect Pence the new chair. The hasty move set the incoming administration back weeks in some ways, if not months. I'm telling y'all, he thinks he's on The Apprentice. Abraham Lincoln famously constructed a team of rivals after he won office, assembling his former competitors into a cohesive cabinet. But because of poor planning and widespread doubt about his prospects, Trump wound up with the opposite, rival teams. Infighting from the campaign spilled over into the presidential transition. Advisors brandished their knives, backstabbing each other to get the jobs they wanted. At the same time, a parade of job seekers made the pilgrimage to Trump Tower in New York to pay homage to the incoming commander-in-chief, seeking a place on his short list. So now people coming out like roaches, and they're trying to find any way to say, pick me, pick me, pick me, because they know he is all about under the table. So he's like, so if I do this for you, you do this for me. So they're all out there now waving their hand around. They also know that he doesn't necessarily care about qualifications. So if anytime you thought this is your moment, this will be the time to come in on and do it. So all these people are at the Trump hotel. Most had conveniently changed their minds about the president-elect. Factions formed, conspiracies to undermine potential candidates while boosting others were hatched and dissolved, sometimes in the same day. There was the Kushner camp, the Bannon camp, the Conway camp, and other such Penceland, or the so-called Flintstones, the acolytes of the anointed national security advisor. They were united at times, divided at others. This was real-life version of The Apprentice. I literally just said that. That's so crazy. Some of these rivalries persisted deep into the start of the president's term. Trump often encouraged disunity by making suggestions about who had his favor and who had not. So if you're wondering what this would have felt like, you can go ahead and stream, I'm sure, The Apprentice. I never watched it, but you can stream The Apprentice, and that's what they're saying. He'll be like, you're my boo today, you're not my boo. Tomorrow, today. So they're telling you exactly is what we thought it was. Despite the internal bedlam, the president-elect did not end up with a government solely populated by flunkies. Far from it. In fact, although a long list of highly experienced Republican leaders were de facto barred from the incoming administration for being, quote unquote, never Trumpers, those who didn't sign their names onto anti-Trump screeds, myself included, had a shot. So as long as you didn't speak against him, you could get pulled into this whole thing that was going on. But if you spoke against him, you got put on this list. So this is why people are afraid to stand up and say anything, which is what it is, right? So respected political figures and experts signed up. Notwithstanding the surrealness of it all, the process produced a White House team and a cabinet more competent than critics were willing to give Trump credit for. There were former governors such as Nikki Haley and Rick Perry, four-star generals such as John Kelly and Jim Mattis, corporate executives such as Rex Tillerson and Stephen Mnuchin, U.S. senators such as Jeff Sessions and Dan Coats, and former cabinet secretaries such as Elaine Chao. This was a solid group of lieutenants for any president-elect, and for a time, Donald Trump's choices were encouraging to those who doubted him, right? So now, remember, this is in the beginning, so everybody's kind of like, what's about to happen? Some are excited, some are scared, some are totally pessimistic. And so now everybody's like, okay, maybe this is going to pan out. Maybe he's going to do what we think. The assemblage of outsiders helped tamp down some of the feuding within the Trump team. These people had no reason to fight with one another. They were not tainted by the internal politics of the campaign. Unlike the president-elect's friends and the leftovers he brought with him, who were used to currying Trump's favor and surviving his fickle turns of affection, these experienced leaders were not worn down by life inside Trump's inner circle of flattery and deception. The administration's recruits came together because many of them had one trait in common. They didn't know the chief executive. So they're thinking, again, we're here to serve. We want to help. Let's figure out how we can do this, right? So false optimism infected the new team. Everyone was hopeful. The rancor of the campaign would be replaced by the high purpose of leading the country, which can ennoble even the most distracted minds. Quote unquote, hope evaporated on first contact with the president-elect. He was so focused on his win that he could barely focus on the forthcoming task of governing. Trump carried around maps outlining his electoral victory, which he would pull out at odd times in discussions meant to focus on preparing him to take office. He would beckon his guests as well as aides, advisors, and incoming cabinet officers to gaze at the sea of red on the map, visual proof that he'd won. And they would say, yeah, we know you won. That's why we're here. They're supposed to be prepping him. He's about to become commander-in-chief, the most powerful man in the world. And all he's doing is carrying around a map showing that he won. That's all I'm gonna say. It was clear something wasn't right. Incoming staff exchanged worried glances about what they were seeing during the transition. Now, this is the transition. This is 2016, 2017. This place was already crazy. They confided in each other, and Trump hadn't even entered the White House yet. His turbulent demeanor and off-the-wall comments, like his continued fixation with Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who were leaving the government, were not part of a television persona. They were the real thing. His management of the upstart operation was, well, not really management at all. The bonds that eventually became an informal steady state were tightened not long after the president's inauguration. Only days into office, he invited congressional leaders to the White House to meet. And this was supposed to be a bipartisan show of goodwill. But at the outset of the meeting, the president railed against what he claimed were millions of people who voted illegally in the election, depriving him of winning the popular vote. I'm gonna just pause here. I'm glad he knows he didn't win the popular vote, and I'm glad that it bothers him, because he tends to forget that piece and go running all over Twitter, making it sound like I won the world. No, he got a little map that he's carrying around. So I'm glad he was upset about that, because he should have been. The assertion had been debunked previously, and it was so clearly false on its face that no one could believe he was raising it again. So he is basically looking for aliens, like they came in from space, voted illegally, and he is set out to find these people. After the meeting, we tried to brush it off by joking that the president was off his rocker, but it wasn't really a joke. We were genuinely worried by the tone he was setting. Then there were his actions. President Trump signed off on a rapid-fire barrage of executive orders intended to undo Obama administration policies, cut regulations, spur economic growth, and more. On the surface, everyone agreed with the goals. Only a few aides had been involved in the drafting, though, and the president really didn't seem aware of what he's done. Some orders were so hastily written that they backfired spectacularly, like the president's travel ban on citizens from supposedly terrorist countries, an order that wound up in courts, was publicly protested, and needlessly cost the administration early congressional and public goodwill. So basically, he came out the gate too fast without enough information. He really did not know what was going on. New White House appointees and agency officials were livid that the rollouts weren't more carefully planned. So he's just rolling stuff out. He's waking up, he's tweeting, and these people are like, wait, we supposed to be planning this out here. Like, this isn't just your first day of kindergarten. You know what I'm saying? So then the president decided to give his chief political strategist, Steve Bannon. Remember Steve? Remember Steve Bannon? A seat on the National Security Council. This really got the folks up in arms. The National Security Council is a White House organization responsible for advising the president on the most sensitive matters of intelligence, defense, and diplomacy that affect the lives and safety of Americans at home and around the world. Seats at the table are typically reserved for top agency heads, not media advisors. Now remember, Steve Bannon, his background is in TV production. And if you read Fear by Bob Woodward, there's actually evidence of a conversation back in 2011, 2012, where Steve Bannon met with Trump, and Trump said, I want to become president, show me how. So Steve Bannon is a television producer, and that's exactly what he did, and that's exactly where we're at, y'all. So here we are with Steve. The NSC matters were supposed to be political discussions. In this case, Bannon elevated, while others, such as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Joint Chiefs of Staff is the head of all the military branches. So each military branch has a chief of staff, has a secretary, okay? That's usually the top dog. And what they're saying is Steve Bannon, the TV producer, was given the spot above the Joint Chiefs of Staff, okay? And the Director of National Intelligence were effectively demoted. The president's most experienced recruits were astounded. Although Trump reversed the order a few months later, it wasn't forgotten. The administration was only a few weeks in, and already the mayhem made everyone look foolish. Internal whispers grew louder. This was not a way to do business. As a result, people who previously been outsiders to Trump world grew closer to one another and developed a bizarre sense of fraternity, like bank robbery hostages lying on the floor at gunpoint, unable to sound the alarm, but aware that everyone else was stricken with the same fear of the unknown. He just compared some of the most sought after, career-changing, life-changing opportunities to work in the Oval Office, the National Security Council, the things that people would wait their whole lives for. And he just compared that to being like bank robbery hostages lying on the floor at gunpoint. Okay. The next section is, he's about to do something. Ain't that's what we say every day. To be clear, there is no seditious plot inside the administration to undercut the president. The steady state is not code for a coordinated scheme to sabotage his policies, or worse, oust him from office. I use resistance in quotes because it's neither the right's fear of a deep state gone rogue or the left's conception of an active subversion campaign. Trump's critics, who are rooting for an actual resistance, have let their imaginations run wild with the idea of public servants frustrating the gears of the government to bring Trump down. If this kind of conspiracy exists, it's news to me, and it would be disturbing. Public service is a public trust. Let's just pause the tape there. Public service is a public trust. That's the truth. And so it would be really great if the president, commander-in-chief, and leader of the free world understood that that is the highest public service to the entire United States of America. It's public trust. Any government employee with such a nefarious end goal should be condemned. Instead, the early steady state formed to keep the wheels from coming off of the White House wagon. When presidential appointees started conferring about their shared concerns with the nation's chief executive, it was not only in dimly lit, smoke-filled back rooms of Washington, it was done informally, in weekly phone calls, or on the margins of meetings. People who compared notes during the workday and in the normal course of business realized that the administration's problems were more than fleeting. They were systemic. They emanated from the top. So, y'all, first of all, this is not going to be the only book that's going to come out. This is just a guy who figured, let me get out here first, and he's keeping notes. What he is saying here is people compare notes throughout their meetings, and then they talk on the margins of the meetings after. So you know every person that has come through this White House is going to have a story to tell. They have notes to share, and we are going to see that as this rolls on. They're going to see receipts and receipts and receipts and receipts. And just like in the Nixon impeachment and situation, they were dropping tapes like mixtapes. You understand? And so right now, what do we have going on? There's transcripts dropping. There's people coming in with text messages. Pretty soon, we're probably going to have an album dropped by somebody. And I mark my words, it's going to keep dropping, because the more courage is built up, where people are able to say, I'm just going to be honest and I'm going to stand for what I stand for. The more we see that, you're going to see that, just like with Nixon. And finally, the bomb drops with Nixon. He decides, yeah, that's my voice. I got to roll, right? So we're going to begin to see that, is that these notes and these receipts that this gentleman is referring to is going to keep coming out. They're going to keep coming out. People are going to keep standing up. You're going to hear recordings. You're going to hear calls. It's just a matter of who and when. You got to just stand by. Two traits are illustrative of what brought the steady state together: the president's inattentiveness and his impulsiveness. Both will be documented further in the book. So he says, stand by, y'all. But coming to terms with these characteristics for the first time had a powerful impact on the people serving in the administration. Take, for instance, the process of briefing the President of the United States, which is an experience that no description can fully capture. All right, y'all, now listen up. Now, you know, on the TV, we always see where you bring in something to the president and he gets pre-briefs and he gets books and he takes things home and he's reading all the time. All right, so now they're about to describe what it's like to brief the president. In any administration, advisors would rightfully want to be prepared for such a moment, because this is your moment. If you've never done anything else, this is your moment and you're about to come with it, right? This is the most powerful person on earth we're talking about. But before a conversation with him, you want to make sure you've got your main points lined up and a crisp agenda ready to present. You are about to discuss weighty matters, sometimes life and death matters, with the leader of the free world, a moment of utmost sobriety and purpose. The process does not unfold that way in the Trump administration. Briefings with Donald Trump are of an entirely different nature. Early on, briefers were told not to send lengthy documents. Okay, Trump wouldn't read them, nor should they bring summaries to the Oval Office. If they must bring paper, then PowerPoint was preferred because he is a visual learner. Okay, that's fine. Many thought to themselves, leaders like to absorb information in different ways. Then officials were told that the PowerPoint decks need to be slimmed down. The president couldn't digest too many slides. He needed more images to keep his interest and fewer words. Then they were told to cut back the overall message on complicated issues, such as military readiness and a federal budget, to just 3 main points. That was still too much. Soon, West Wing aides were exchanging best practices for success in the Oval Office. The most salient advice? Forget the 3 points. Come in with 1 main point and repeat it over and over again, even if the president inevitably goes off on tangents until he gets it. Just keep steering the subject back to it. 1 point, just that 1 point. Because you cannot focus the commander-in-chief's attention on more than one goddamn thing over the course of a meeting, okay? And that was his words, y'all. So let's just pause for a moment. They said, let's bring in the briefing. Then they found out this brother don't read. So then they said, PowerPoints. He can do PowerPoints. Okay, you got to take the words off the PowerPoints. He don't do PowerPoints either. Okay, you can't do complex issues and complex drawings. You got to do points. Okay, you can't do 3 points. You just got to do 1 point. Okay, just forget the PowerPoints altogether. We're just going to do repeat, 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 and hope that something lands. I mean, that sounds productive and scary as hell. Okay, some officials refused to believe this is how it worked. Are you serious? They asked, quizzing others who'd already briefed the president. How could they dumb down their work to this level? They were facilitating presidential decisions on major issues, not debates about where to go out for dinner. I saw a number of appointees as they dismissed the advice of the wizened hands and went in to see the president prepared for robust policy discussion on momentous national topics and a peppery give and take. They invariably paid the price. What the is this? The president would shout. Hold on. So these smart patriots, servants that he chose to work for him are coming in to brief him on issues, policies, things that will matter to the American people. And he says, what the is this? Okay. Looking at a document one of them handed him. These are just words, a bunch of words. It doesn't mean anything. These are all quotes, y'all. Sometimes he would throw the papers back on the table. He definitely wouldn't read them. So I want to say this is probably my largest fear of this entire circus of an administration that we've been dealing with is really finding out that he doesn't read. Because we've all joked about it. You see it. He can't spell. We know he doesn't care about grammar. We know he doesn't care about none of that. He doesn't care about people or respect or integrity. But and you kind of joke that he doesn't read. This is the first time I've seen it briefed that this is actually happening in the Oval Office, that he does not read. That's like we're all on a train with a conductor that doesn't want to see. And we are just riding down the countryside, hoping for the best as we are pointed toward the shore. One of the hardest culture shifts took place with the National Security Council. National Security Council staff were accustomed to producing long-winded classified memos. Because again, he's not running a Dollar Tree, y'all. Like, why? It's just shocking to me that we would think we're just going to dumb everything down because he doesn't want to use the English language. We're not running a Dollar Tree. We're not running a lemonade stand. But if the aim was to educate this new commander-in-chief, they couldn't submit a 50-page report entitled something like Integrated National Strategy for Indo-Pacific Partnership and Defense. Expect him to read it and then discuss it. That would be like speaking Aramaic to Trump through a pillow. Even if he tried hard to pay attention, which he didn't, he wouldn't be able to understand what the hell he was hearing. Now, again, this is his boy. These are his people. It took a lot of trial and error for West Wing staff to realize there needed to be a change in the White House briefing process. Until that happened, officials would walk out of briefings frustrated. Quote, he is the most distracted person I've ever met, unquote. He is one of the president's security lieutenants confessed, quote, he has no fucking clue what we are talking about, unquote. More changes were in order to cater to Trump's peculiarities. Documents were dramatically downsized, position papers became sound bites, and as a result, complex proposals were reduced to a single page or ideally a paragraph translated into Trump's winners and losers tone. So going back to that PowerPoint, you got to get it into one picture, one word. So we're taking complex foreign policy strategy, some of problems that people have been trying to solve for generations, centuries since the beginning of the country, foreign problems, Middle East problems, economic, immigration, I mean, name it. And we're saying, no, you need to dumb it down to one word, one picture, and then it has to show a winner and a loser, and then he may tune in. Okay. Others discovered that if they walked into the Oval Office with a simple graphic that Trump liked, it would do more than the trick. We may hear about it for days, in fact. He would hold on to the picture, waving it around at us in meetings. Did you see this? Can you believe this? This is beautiful. Something truly special, Dan. He might summon the White House special media guru who sits just outside the Oval Office. Let's tweet this out, okay? Here's what I want to say. That way the public would get to share in his excitement too. One graphic that left Trump spellbound was intended to explain certain government and industrial relationships. The basic depiction of interlocked gears, likely pulled from clip art. Clip art. You know clip art, y'all, on Microsoft Word, where you insert into your document clip art. Showed how different elements of the government bureaucracy depended on parts of the private sector. The president was so mesmerized that he showed it off to the Oval Office visitors for no apparent reason, leaving us and them scratching our heads. Another time, he became enamored with a parody poster in the style of Game of Thrones with the words, "Sanctions are coming," overlaid on a photo of the president. This was meant to be a teaser for forthcoming Iran sanctions. Trump was elated and tweeted the image out to his followers at once, resulting in a cycle of memes mocking the graphic. Seeing this type of behavior was both educating and jarring to the burgeoning steady state. It was a visceral lesson that we weren't just appointees of the president. We were glorified government babysitters. So this is my second nightmare, y'all, is that how immature he appears is actually how immature he is. And everybody says, no, he just talks that way, and no. Like they think somewhere he's sitting behind closed doors being a genius, or he turns on the Einstein after 7 p.m. or something. When we know good and well, his own people are calling themselves babysitters and creating memes and clip arts to discuss the things that everybody else truly cares about and are fighting over. And you think he's actually trying to consider things that make sense for people, and he's just looking for a clip art and a meme. The feeling of unease was cemented by having to deal with the president's penchant for making major decisions with little forethought or discussion. These 5-alarm fire drills, as I call them, seemed like a curse. When Trump wanted to do something, aides might only get a few hours' notice from him before he announced it. Then they launched a frenetic response effort, a race against the clock to reshape his views before the tweet went out. This could upend entire workdays. Over time, the last-minute warnings actually came to be seen as a luxury. It's better to have a few hours or minutes for the matter to intervene than no opportunity at all to convince Trump to hit the brakes on a wacky or destructive idea. He's less inclined to preview his decisions today. Here is how it may play out in the early days of the administration. The president sees something on television. He doesn't like it. It makes him think, maybe I should fire the Secretary of Commerce, or we should pull out of that treaty. That's a really terrible treaty after all. He may tee up a tweet. Then he bounces it off the next aide he talks to, who is stunned to discover that this terrible idea is tip of brain for the President of the United States and might be on the brink of becoming a reality. The aide finds the president disinterested in thinking through the consequences. We're going to do this, okay? Okay? We're going to do this today, okay? Tell Sean to get ready. He wants Press Secretary Sean Spicer prepared to defend it to the death. The staff throws up the bat signal, calling a snap meeting or a teleconference. He's about to do something, one warns the group, explaining what the president is about to announce. He can't do this. We'll all look like idiots, and he'll get murdered for it in the press, another exclaims. Yeah, well, I'm telling you, he's going to do it unless someone gets to him fast, the first warns. Can you cancel your afternoon? Officials rush back into the White House. The delicate Oval Office schedule is shattered. To make way for an unexpected intervention, the top agency executives scrap meetings with foreign leaders, press conferences, and briefings to join the gathering. The conversation with the president is tense. He wants to do what he wants to do. Consequences be damned. It isn't beneath him to attack his own family members, too. Quote, Jared, you don't know what you're talking about, okay? I mean, seriously, you don't know, unquote. After some dire warnings, everyone will get subpoenaed. This will cost you dearly with working class voters. This will put Americans in harm's way. He might show signs of reconsidering. Refusing to admit error, the president insists he still wants to go through with his original plan, but he backs off temporarily or agrees to a less drastic measure, averting disaster for the moment. These mini crises didn't happen once or twice at the administration's outset. They became the norm, a semi-regular occurrence with aftershocks that could be felt for days. Some aides grew so wore down by the roller coaster of presidential wins that they started encouraging him to hold more campaign rallies, putting aside the fact that it wasn't even campaign season. So they're trying to find any reason, like, you know what, you should go on the road. You should take a trip. You should go golfing. Don't you own a couple spots? Like, you know what? Maybe you should go out with your wife, take her to dinner, go campaign, even though there's not a campaign. The events had the dual benefit of giving Trump something fun to do and also getting him out of town, where he would hypothetically do less damage. More public events were put on his schedule, allowing frayed nerves back in Washington the chance to recover. Yet even when the president was convinced not to do something spontaneous and given a few days' distance from the idea, he would still bring it back up when he got into town. That's the storyline of many of the anecdotes referenced in this book. It might be a desire to fire someone who'd only recently been confirmed by the Senate, like his Federal Reserve chairman, or an itch to issue an executive order to end a deal he hates, like the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. His cyclical urges can't be suppressed for long. Steady staters felt this was becoming a seesaw presidency. I tell y'all. So that brings us to, we are about halfway through the first chapter. Through the first chapter, but I wanted to come on and just get some more of this out. Now we're all going to have nightmares. Because what I love where people like to say, but his policies are so great and everything is so wonderful and everything's fine and everything else. It's like you just throw a bunch of stuff at a target, like you just randomly start throwing stuff. And every once in a while, you're going to hit the target. But what he's saying is there's absolutely no forethought. There's no strategic session. There's no advising of wise counsel. There's no full understanding. There's no meditation between idea and execution. There's none of that going on. It is literally, as I know for myself, have absolutely been in fear of, that there is no foresight. There's not some genius and the Wizard of Oz behind the veil sitting up there pulling the strings. It's not happening. That's scary. All right, y'all. Well, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to finish drinking my wine. Cheers, y'all. Happy Wednesday. This is chapter 1. We'll check in tomorrow. Take care. Peace.